that was hidden and behind doors. All of this has been open and transparent. This government continues to promote open and transparent trade dialogue.
Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Labrador. The honourable member for Labrador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise, Mr. Speaker, to speak about the over 1,000 former employees of Wabush Mines in Labrador and Quebec who lost 20 to 24% of their hard-earned pension benefits when Cliffs Natural Resources walked away from their iron ore operations in Wabush. They also walked away from their unfunded pension liabilities that was owed to workers. Cliffs in Canada, under the CCAA process, is liquidating assets for its creditors and being allowed to pass over workers' pensions, medical benefits, and deferred salaries that workers have already earned. These workers spent decades of building the company and the town that they live in. Cliffs Canada may have become unprofitable with low commodity prices in Canada, but their resources in the USA remain profitable. Mr. Speaker, I find it unacceptable that profits and assets can be shuffled across the border for years before a company can be assessed, yet CCAA can only look back through 1 year of a company's operations, and it provides no mechanism to fully protect the workers. Mr. Speaker, when you work for a pension and benefits, you deserve to collect them.
The honourable member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honour a well-recognized hockey softball community volunteer, neighbour and friend, Mike Landucci. Prior to his passing last spring following a short battle with cancer, Mike was a dedicated Fort St. John minor hockey referee and softball umpire who was highly regarded as the referee committee member for Northeastern BC Yukon District. Further was instrumental in training the next generation of young referees in the BCPs. The Fort St. John Flyers Hockey Club recently honoured his memory at a preseason North Peace Hockey League game against Dawson Creek Canucks. North Peace referees are honouring Mike this year by wearing the ML patch I'm wearing today. Michael Joseph Landucci is survived by his fiancée, Faye, his son Chris, his sister Kathy, and her husband Michael and their children. As one of our community volunteers, as a neighbour and as a friend to all you encountered, not to mention the Christmas Eve visits to our host of Santa Claus, you will be missed. May you rest in peace, Mike.
The Honourable Member for Brome-Missisquoi. Mr. Speaker, as you undoubtedly know, the environment is a top priority for our government. The main reason that I came back to politics was the quality of the water in the two lakes sharing a boundary with the U.S., Champlain and Memphremagog. Last week, I called a meeting of the International Joint Council, the Minister of Quebec, municipalities, etc., the Quebec government, to make people aware of all types of bacteria. And the mayors all agree that the water quality there is deteriorating. Thousands of people are seeing their drinking water affected. Action is required quickly. That's why it's of the utmost importance for the mandate of the International Joint Committee for this jointly shared waters to take action on this bacteria.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, many Canadians voted for change. Unfortunately, the change they have so far from this government is nothing but chump change. How else can you explain the huge mistake the Liberals made in their bill to change the Canada Pension Plan? And how do you explain their refusal to answer a simple question? Will they fix their flawed bill? 10 times I stood in this House last week and asked if the government would fix this flawed bill. 10 times I received non-answers. No one on the government side wants to take responsibility for their mistake. And more frightening, no one on the government side has stood up to say they will fix it. The Liberals' plan singles out women and the disabled for exclusion. We have been calling on the government to recognize their mistake and acknowledge the problem. Seeing nothing from the Liberals, we were proposing to fix the bill ourselves. I hope all members will support my amendment at committee. The supposed feminist Prime Minister is failing Canadian women and disabled. Shame on him, and please fix the bill.
Honourable Member for Surrey Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank about 3 individuals who have excelled in their field and have made us all proud. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Manny Baya, one of BC's 50 most influential, a young entrepreneur who created Vancity Buzz and Daily Hive, 2 sites that have some of the largest Canadian audiences, all while working out of his basement, but now employs dozens and millions in revenue. The second is Dr. Kamal Masri of SFU Surrey, who has inspired his business class to raise thousands for cancer research. And finally, I want to recognize Charn Paul Gill, a man who has fought for workers' rights, helped build PICS, a settlement agency that helps immigrants integrate and settle to become great Canadians, and Guru Nanak Niwas, a 77-unit assisted living facility in Surrey. Canada is better because of the commitments to research, technology, and charity because of these individuals. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Rose grows prolifically across my province, its delicate beauty often belying its resiliency to flourish after harsh winters. I can't think of a better metaphor to liken the women of Alberta to. This year they're being tested, and they and their families are out of work, many for over a year. They bear a burden of their families' lost income and lost pride. They do this while making hard choices that are necessary to keep a roof over their heads. And in the midst of their own struggles, their shoulders are cried on by those who don't want handouts, they just want to work. I thank them for their strength and for their sacrifice. The women of Alberta watch as this government ignores us, calls the work that we do dirty, raise our taxes, and prioritize everything and everywhere else except for us. Well, Mr. Speaker, if you try to uproot a wild rose, you end up with a fistful of thorns. So the women of Alberta will not be silent. We demand action, and we demand it now. We will ensure a strong Alberta, and in doing so, a strong Canada.
The honourable member for Brossard-Saint-Lambert. Mr. Speaker, as chair of the Canada-Moldavia Parliamentary Friendship Group, I'd like to congratulate the Moldavian people on the first presidential elections by universal suffrage in more than 20 years. In this year, the year marking the 25th anniversary of independency.
We need support and encouragement from the more established ones. Canada has a great deal to offer this country, striving to attain ambitious goals of good governance, prosperity, and multilateral relationships. La position géopolitique de la Moldavie.
Moldavia's geopolitical position makes it an important ally for Canada in Eastern Europe. In addition, Moldavia has made considerable efforts to join the EU.
It comes without saying that the success of one country on the road to reforms and to European integration will have a huge impact and mobilizing effect on others. Once again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate the people of Moldova on the 25th anniversary of independence. Merci.
The honourable member for Etobicoke Centre.
Mr. Speaker, 84 years ago, the horror of the Holodomor, the genocide of Ukraine's rural population, began. Stalin decreed food illegal for Ukrainian farmers. The Kremlin's Red Brigade scoured the countryside, confiscating grain and livestock. Farmers who were caught hiding food, as little as 5 stalks of wheat, were shot on sight. Ukraine's lush countryside was transformed into a denuded and silent darkness as people ate grasses and anything living. The eerie silence that engulfed villages only broken by the sound of death wagons transporting starvation-bloated bodies. Let us also contemplate how was it possible that in the West, with the exception of a few brave journalists and politicians, so many chose to look away. 84 years hence, once again, we confront the darkest of evils, genocide. Collectively, let this House have the moral strength of conviction to give meaning to the solemn pledge of never again. Vічна їм пам'ять.
Honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
The President Minister of Public Safety, then in opposition, presented a private member's motion, number 446, calling for defibrillators to be installed in all 5,600 RCMP cruisers. Then, as now, this would cost only $10 million. Statistics from other police forces show that each year 1 life is saved for every 17 defibrillators installed in police vehicles. So following through on motion 446 a year ago, when the Liberals took office, would have resulted in 5,600 installed defibrillators and 320 saved lives. But a year has gone by, and even though the very same member who introduced Motion 446 is now Minister in charge of the RCMP, nothing has happened. In consequence, 320 Canadians who would otherwise be alive today are now dead. Why has the Minister failed to follow through? What does he say to the families of all the Canadians whose lives would have been saved if he had followed through on his own proposal?
Honourable member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to commend one of my outstanding constituents from Dartmouth Cole Harbour, Planet Paws business owner and internationally known pet nutrition blogger, Rodney Habib. Rodney's life changed forever after his own dog was harmed during the melamine-tainted pet food crisis. At that moment, he devoted his entire life to changing the way we feed our pets. Rodney continues to give back to our community through improvements at Shuby Park in Dartmouth and by donating a percentage of his business's sales to local schools. Now Rodney has reached a huge milestone. He's reached over 1.3 million likes on Facebook. That makes him one of the largest brand followings on Facebook in Canada. His work on pet nutrition is known and respected worldwide. They say that a dog is a human's best friend, but I'd say that for dogs, Rodney is their best friend. On behalf of pet owners everywhere and my dog Toby, I congratulate and wish Rodney Habib continued success.
The honourable member for Thunder Bay, Rainy River.
Mr. Speaker, this past week I toured the Bombardier plant in Thunder Bay, a site that has a rich place in Canadian history. Founded by the Canadian Car and Foundry Company in 1912, this facility was first made to produce railway boxcars. During World War II, the plant began construction of the famous Hawker Hurricane fighter for the Royal Canadian Air Force, led by Chief Engineer Elsie McGill, the first woman in Canada to earn a degree in aeronautical engineering. Since Bombardier acquired the plant in 1992, the facility has been responsible for delivering a number of notable railcar designs distributed across North America, including the Toronto Rocket subway cars for the TTC, bi-level cars for GO Transit. These cars carry thousands of Canadians daily, but the site is only as good as its workforce. Production was and still undertaken by hardworking and skilled men and women to produce a top-quality product. I'm extremely proud to have this facility in my riding of Thunder Bay Rainy River. It continues to serve as a hub of innovation.
Honourable member for Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, a bit of snow couldn't stop Ottawa Redblacks from emerging yesterday as the CFL's Eastern Division champions. The Redblacks came ready to play in front of more than 24,000 loyal fans. So when the snow came, in typical Canadian fashion, it was shoveled away. And when the shovels scraped away the lines, again, in typical Canadian fashion, they repainted them by hand. Finishing 35-23, thanks to the leadership of quarterback Henry Burris and a great coaching and support staff, the Red Blacks are off to play the Calgary Stampeders for the Grey Cup next Sunday. And next year, Mr. Speaker, when Ottawa hosts the Grey Cup, I am confident they will do so as reigning champions. Go Red Blacks!
The Honourable Member for Alfred Pellan.
Monsieur le Président, le 20 novembre marque...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. November 20th marks Universal Children's Day. To highlight this day, I went to visit children in Alfred Pellan as part of a UNICEF initiative in Canada called Invite Your MP to School. The event provided an opportunity to discuss with young people issues that are very important to them. By listening to them, Parliament will be more inclusive and we will be able to enact policies that guarantee their rights are respected. Yesterday, I went and joined with the Maison de la Famille in Saint-François, and I attended a meeting on the Convention of the Rights for Children, which discussed their universal rights.
Fight against child poverty, and we must continue to do everything we can so that all children have the same opportunities to succeed in life. Thank you, Mr. President.
A member for North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, in the month of November, Canadians remember our men and women in uniform who have stood on guard for all Canadians. Today I want to pay special tribute to one of those men, Fred Gendron, one of my constituents in Powell River. Fred served our country as a soldier from 1942 until 1946. He fought in France and Germany, and he was part of the Liberation Force in Holland, for which he was awarded a medal. Fred stayed on after the war ended to serve Canada as a member of the occupation force in Germany. For the past 12 years, Fred has laid the wreath for his Member of Parliament at Remembrance Day ceremonies. This year, Fred was too ill, and his wife Shirley and I laid the wreath in recognition of the man she loves so much. I am so grateful for the courage, dignity, and service that Fred offered to our country, as so many others have done and continue to do so. I know that this House will join me in offering our gratitude to a remarkably humble Fred Gendron, my constituent and friend in Powell River.
The honourable member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, this Sunday, the 104th Grey Cup game will be played in Toronto. Canadian football remains a distinct game, a unique part of our Canadian heritage. Our game is played on a bigger field with a shorter play clock, only 3 downs, and of course, in Canadian football, we have bigger balls. Canadians can be proud knowing that our game is an exciting, high-scoring, and fast-paced game, a game worthy of the annual celebration that is the Grey Cup, a game that will be watched by millions of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. This year also promises the continuation of a tradition begun in 1948 of bringing Western-style hospitality to Toronto, so watch out for road apples in front of the Royal York Hotel. We expect a great game, and although I enjoy my time here in Ottawa, let there be no doubt where my allegiance will be as Calgary goes for its 8th Grey Cup. On behalf of my constituents and all Stampeders fans, go Stamps, go! Go Stamps, go!
Honourable member for Willowdale.
Mr. Speaker, 175 years ago yesterday, in what is now Saint-Louis-Laurentide, Quebec, Henri Charles Wilfrid Laurier was born, and Canadian history was inexorably changed as a result. I rise today to join all Canadians in celebrating a Canadian icon and statesman. Sir Laurier willed into being the open, tolerant, and diverse Canada we know and cherish today. 142 years since first being elected to federal office and 120 years since being named Prime Minister, Sir Laurier's sunny ways continues to resonate in these halls, albeit sporadically, but fortunately considerably more often across our land. Considered by many Canada's greatest Prime Minister, Laurier is, on a personal level, my favourite Prime Minister, with one obvious exception. His ringing pronouncement, Canada is free and freedom is its nationality, remains as true today as when...
Oral questions. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals, even though they weren't under the snow like we were in Ottawa yesterday at the football game, well, they've almost fumbled away the ball. In the last year, they've signed no new free trade agreements with our partners, Mr. Speaker. And now the Prime Minister is showing that he's not a good negotiator. How can Canadians trust that they will negotiate good treaties to create jobs here in Canada? The Honourable Minister of International Trade. Mr. Speaker, CETA is clearly in the national interest. It's important for all members of this House to set aside partisan politics. We supported CETA when we were in the opposition, and I would have expected the Conservatives to do the same now that they are in opposition. CETA is a progressive agreement, very important for the middle class, and we are proud to have put it in place. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean.
Sir, but for the wrong question, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals almost dropped the ball on CETA, which was initiated under our government. Then the Liberals have just lost a year without signing any important trade agreements. No one. Mr. Speaker, since the Prime Minister reveals himself as an inefficient negotiator, how can Canadians have confidence in negotiating good treaties and creating jobs here in Canada?
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I am a bit confused as to how the member opposite can claim that our government has failed to sign trade agreements. The most significant trade agreement signed by a government of Canada since the signing of NAFTA is CETA. And I would like to remind the member opposite that that agreement was signed by our Prime Minister. And that signature was made possible only by the hard work of our government.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Well, Mr. Speaker, we all remember Mr. Barroso's visit. We won't go back to that, but let's go back to softwood lumber, Mr. Speaker. We seem clearly to be heading towards a legal dispute with our American partners. And as 75% of Canadian products are exported to the United States, this means that we have a lot of concerns. How can this government, how can this minister put in place a softwood lumber agreement that will protect the 300,000 jobs
here in Canada?
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I am once again surprised that the Honourable Member has spoken about Mr. Barroso's visit. That was a visit that was very, very costly for Canadians, and the visit was done before the conclusion of the agreement. It was a festival without a final agreement. That's not what our government does. We believe in getting the work done, and that is why we signed the agreement.
The member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Well, Mr. Speaker, they signed the deal into the next stage, but it was already done when we left in 2014. This has been a lost year for Canada with regard to trade opportunities. Last spring, I called on this Liberal government to be ready to forge ahead with the progressive TPP signatories in the event the Americans got cold feet, like they have. Reports coming out of the APEC summit in Lima, Peru, indicate that 6 countries, Mexico, Japan, Australia, Malaysia, New Zealand, and Singapore, have committed to pursuing the TPP trade agreement with or without the United States. Why are our Prime Minister and Trade Minister MIA and allowing Canada to be left out of this important deal?
Hear, hear. Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite began with CETA, that's where I'm going to start. And I think it is very important to point out that the finalization of the legal scrub of CETA was delayed for almost 2 years because of the failure of the previous government to make the progressive changes that were necessary. We understood what needed to be done, and we got this historic deal done. When it comes to the TPP, we committed to consulting with Canadians, and that is what we are proud to be doing.
Honourable Member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, the 2 years was budgeted early on for the legal scrub and the translation that was going to be required. The minister finds herself in the unenviable position of being on the podium but not even playing in the game. For the last year, the Liberals' continued indecision on the TPP has put Canada at a further disadvantage. The Prime Minister has sidelined Canada's economic interests and future prosperity while 6 countries forge ahead with the TPP agreement. Why won't they work with these progressive countries to implement this specific trade agreement? Get it done.
Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I am really saddened to need to point out that the honourable member is as ill-informed about the TPP as he is about CETA. The reality is CETA was stalled until we formed government and until we made the necessary changes. As for the TPP, as the honourable member ought to know, and he could consult with one of his colleagues who is well informed about this agreement, that agreement was signed last year. There are 2 years, a 2-year period for all the TPP countries to consult on it. That's what we're...
The Honourable Member for Essex.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are trying to push through legislation to implement CETA while ignoring Canadians' outstanding concerns with this deal. When the Liberals were in opposition, they agreed with New Democrats that on CETA, more consultations and analysis were needed. But the minister has ignored calls for the removal of investor state rules, refused to address rising costs of prescription drugs, and neglected to consult Canadians. Trade with Europe is too important to get wrong. Why is the minister pushing through this flawed agreement instead of taking the time to get it right?
Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, as as usual, we're in a position where the Conservatives claim we are doing one thing wrong and the NDP claim we are doing exactly the same thing wrong. That's where we like to be because it shows we're working hard for Canadians. When it comes to CETA, I am extremely happy to be working energetically to get this progressive trade deal done. This is a deal supported by all the provinces, including Quebec. It is supported by all the socialist parties of Europe. Are there any trade deals the NDP can support?
Honourable member for Essex.
Mr. Speaker, as usual, the Liberals are full of hypocrisy, and around CETA, it's astonishing. In the Liberals' 2014 committee report, even they called on the government to assess the impact of CETA's IP protections on the cost of prescription drugs in Canada. Canadians already pay some of the highest costs for prescription drugs. Under CETA, they could rise by $850 million every year. Now that the Liberals are in government, they are in complete denial about this reality. When will the government be honest with Canadians about the impact of CETA on prescription drug costs?
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to CETA, we are being absolutely transparent and absolutely consistent with the positions we took in opposition. In opposition, I was our party's trade critic, and I was proud then to support this progressive deal. We have made this deal even better. What astonishes me is that the NDP, which was able to support a trade agreement with South Korea, finds itself in 2016 to be unable to support the world's most progressive trade agreement. We are living in a time of a nativist...
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government says that it's listened to dairy producers concerning a plan for compensation for losses linked to CETA. And yet, since their announcement, no one is satisfied. No producers. Last week, Quebec's dairy producers asked the Liberals to increase the amount for producers by $750 million and that they extend the program over 15 years instead of 5 years. Will the government continue to pretend that they're listening to producers, or will they finally give them their due? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
And I appreciate my honourable colleague's question and concern, but I think she's fully aware this government supports dairy farmers and supply management. CETA is certainly an important deal for farmers, and it will provide additional export opportunities up to $1.5 billion. And my honourable colleague is well aware that we announced $350 million, $250 million for the dairy farmers to innovate, $100 million to make sure that our processors are in a position to work when CETA comes into play. Through this, Mr. Speaker, this government has done more for supply management than has been done for the last 10 years.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, that's peanuts. I don't understand how the government can say that it's proud of a transition plan of $250 million over 5 years when annual losses to producers could be as high as $150 million. According to the president of Quebec's Milk Producers Association, the Liberal plan represents barely $5,000 per farm, and producers will need to invest their own money to access that. $5,000, Mr. Speaker, that barely covers electricity costs for one machine. Mr. Speaker, will the government stop pretending that they're listening to our producers?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Well, see, Mr. President, and my honourable colleague is well aware that we sat down with dairy producers and processors for the last number of months, and this is a program that came in place. Well, Ontario dairy farmers are quite pleased, my honourable friend. And the fact is, what we will do is make sure that the dairy farmers and supply management and our processors in this sector will be able to deal with CETA when it comes into play and will be competitive for many years to come. That is why this government sat down with the dairy farmers and put a program in place that will innovate the dairy.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Donald Trump's election could mean an increase in interest rates. And the U.S. Federal Reserve President Janet Yellen has said that an increase could be possible as soon as December. And this, Mr. Speaker, is very bad news for Canadian taxpayers because we know that interests are already represent $20 billion of the current budget. And what is the Minister of Finance doing right now, Mr. Speaker? Well, he's still spending as if nothing is going to happen and increasing the deficit. So for the 10th time, I ask the government, when will we return to balanced budgets? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank my colleague from Louis Saint Laurent. The Government of Canada is doing exactly what Canadians are expecting. When interest rates are low, we are investing, Mr. Speaker. That's exactly what Canadians understand. So what we've done, Mr. Speaker, in our budget for 2016 is invest in families, invest in communities, invest in young people, invest in seniors. We have reiterated the plan that we announced in the fall, Mr. Speaker, and what's most unfortunate is that every time the members from across the way voted against Canada's middle class. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, that's 10 times now that they've refused to tell us when we're going to get back to balanced budgets. And in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, there's no plan for economic growth. The Prime Minister had the opportunity recently to meet with major economic deciders, but he didn't talk about softwood lumber. He didn't talk about Keystone XL. He didn't talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Mr. Speaker, that's this government's record. No plan for economic growth and no plan to get back to balanced budgets. Is there a pilot in a plane over there? The Honourable Minister
has a very clear plan when it comes to economic growth. We've been very clear we're going to use fiscal policy to stimulate growth and invest in the economy. That is why we made historic investments in infrastructure, $180 billion, which will create jobs across the country and position our companies to be more productive, more competitive, and more export-oriented, Mr. Speaker. We have a plan that's investing in middle-class Canadians by providing tax relief to them. Unfortunately, the party opposite has not supported our efforts in helping the middle class and helping grow the economy, Mr. Speaker, and that's very unfortunate.
The member for South Surrey White Rock.
Conservatives delivered a balanced budget, completed over 7,200 infrastructure projects, created over 1.2 million jobs, set up P3 Canada to leverage private sector dollars, which delivered over $6.6 billion in additional infrastructure. The Liberals gave us a $30 billion deficit, 0 new full-time jobs, and they're taking $15 billion away from communities for their bank. Mr. Speaker, with this record, how can they call Canadians stupid and irresponsible for questioning their methods?
Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, our government, along with industry, has created an environment which has created 139,600 jobs since we took office. To illustrate that point, Mr. Speaker, we've invested in small businesses as well. For example, new equipment to improve process for GPAC technology in British Columbia, the same province that the member represents. That created 65 jobs in South Surrey White Rock, a conservative-held riding. We are making investments, regardless of which riding it is, to make sure we have growth and opportunities for our small and large businesses, Mr. Speaker. We are creating jobs.
Member for South Surrey White Rock.
0 net new jobs. Over 99% of announced infrastructure projects by the Liberals are not yet under construction. 99%. And 0 new full-time jobs have been created since the Liberals took office. Mr. Speaker, announcing projects in a community does not equal breaking ground, starting construction, or job creation. Getting infrastructure projects built is what creates jobs. Mr. Speaker, does the minister understand that simply announcing and re-announcing infrastructure projects in communities do not create jobs?
Honourable Minister of Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, our government's priority is to create jobs and create growth, and that's why, since taking office, we have approved 980 projects with a combined value of $12 billion from coast to coast to coast, including a project that is currently underway, along with 70% of the other projects in Surrey, British Columbia, in member's own riding that she represented when she was as a mayor of their city, asking for the same project to be funded by the federal government that we are funding now, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The Honourable Member for Richmond, North Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, all that we know about the creation of this new infrastructure bank is that the Liberals are considering selling off and privatizing Canadian assets, that they want to increase fees and prices, and that they'll take $15 billion that was going to be for municipalities, and they're going to spend it in this bank which will be inaccessible to smaller municipalities. So I have a very simple for the infrastructure minister. Can he name just one municipality of fewer than 50,000 inhabitants that will be able to have access to this infrastructure bank? The Honourable Minister of Infrastructure.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we understand that we need to invest in Canadian communities of all sizes, large urban centres, small communities and mid-sized communities. And it was our government that made historic $2 billion commitment to invest in smaller communities that we made as part of the fall economic update. Only $15 billion out of $180 billion is being allocated to build new projects, transformed projects in all kind of communities from coast to coast to coast, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. Well, Mr. Speaker, he's unable to answer a very simple question because it won't happen. There is no municipality of fewer than 50,000 people that's going to put in place projects of over $100 million. And we know that the investors they met with want returns of 7 to 9%. So what are the Liberals and their buddies going to do? Well, they're going to raise user fees at Canadian ports and airports and put more tolls on highways. What I see are more new taxes from the Liberals. And after a year in power, more taxes and no new jobs. Mr. Speaker, does this government realize that the only thing that they've been able to create in the last year are taxes?
The Minister of Infrastructure.
Well, Mr. Speaker, while we are focused on creating jobs for the middle class and growing the economy for hardworking Canadians, what are the opposition focused on? They're focused on opposing taxes for the wealthiest 1% of Canadians. They're focused on opposing increased enhancements to CPP. They're opposing tax breaks for the middle class. As I said earlier, out of $180 billion for infrastructure, vast majority of that money will be delivered to municipalities of all sizes, the way we have done in the past, creating jobs.
Member for North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, last week we learned the Liberals have hired a corporation who is in the business of buying infrastructure to study the benefits of privatizing our infrastructure. I wonder what they'll discover. This after a report from private sector recs recommending an infrastructure bank to create tolls and user fees to pay off the private sector. What's next? Stacking an NEB panel with oil industry insiders? Oh wait, that's been done. This government was elected to invest in infrastructure. Why are they so determined to sell it off?
Minister of Infrastructure and Communities.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would be interested in about knowing the plan of the member and her party to grow the economy and invest in the infrastructure. We are making historic investments, $180 billion over the 12 years. That will help grow the economy, create jobs for the middle class, as well as help municipalities and communities of all sizes to be more socially inclusive and environmentally sustainable. That's the commitment we made to Canadians, and that's the commitment we are delivering upon, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski, Nejet, Témiscouata-les-Basques.
Was to actually have small deficits to invest in infrastructure and not to privatize them. Voilà.
As Michael Sabia, an advisor to the government, has already said, investors in this infrastructure bank will want to see returns of 7 to 9%. This is 4 times higher than if the government invested themselves at current interest levels. This infrastructure bank, well, it's like a P3 on steroids. The Auditor General of Ontario recently concluded that P3s had cost about $1 billion more a year in infrastructure than if the government of Ontario had invested itself. Does the minister understand that the definition of insanity is...
Honourable Minister of Infrastructure.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we were elected on a platform to invest in historic plan in infrastructure, including the creation of the infrastructure bank. The role of the bank is to build more infrastructure, not less infrastructure. $180 billion of historic investment and leveraging of the private sector will help Canadian municipalities to build the public transit they need, to build more recreational facilities they need, help us grow our economy and create jobs for the middle class and those who are working so hard to join that middle class.
Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, the minister's edict to close the Vegreville Immigration Centre and move it to a Liberal-held city centre riding is just the start. Jobs and families are at risk. Removing 280 jobs from Vegreville is comparable to cutting 55,000 jobs from Edmonton. The Liberal plan failed to create one single new full-time job in all of Canada in the past year, and now they're charging ahead to cut 280 from a small rural town. When will the Liberals reverse this edict and save rural jobs?
Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I definitely understand this is an issue, which is why my staff has spoken to the Mayor of Vegreville, and I've offered to meet the member to discuss these issues. But the fact of the matter is that our fundamental responsibility is to improve levels of service and reduce processing time in immigration, and as a consequence of this move, there will be a net increase in jobs in Alberta, and all those currently working in Vegreville will have an opportunity to remain employed.
Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, this is even bigger than 280 jobs. 250 spousal jobs will be impacted. Small businesses will shut their doors. Struggling farm families will lose the only stable income they have. Schools will lose 1/4 of their students and then teachers. The Liberals' so-called business case doesn't include a cost study or an economic impact assessment. So how can the minister claim anything about job gains when he has actually no idea about the full scope of devastation he's causing?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
The member opposite is talking about jobs in Alberta, so I want to take this opportunity again to highlight what our government is doing to create jobs across Alberta in all the regions. And I'm honored to work.
Order, order, order. Members have strong feelings on many subjects that come before us, but we still have to listen to the question and the answer. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development has the floor. Order.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague, the Minister of Immigration, so eloquently has responded to her question, and I want to take this opportunity to talk about what we're doing to create jobs in Alberta. For example, we invested in commercialization of new technology to improve efficiency in O4D systems, a company in Alberta that will create 12 jobs. Again, these are small businesses that will benefit from those investments. To develop a new product line for use of airline industry, Dakota Supplies, in Alberta, for example, that will create 9 jobs, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Edmonton Manning.
Mr. Speaker, as Christmas approaches, the Canada Revenue Agency has decided to play the Grinch with its employees, using typical Liberal math. An announced expansion of 70 jobs at the Tax Processing Centre in Summerside, PAI, means 182 people are being told they must move to another community or face losing their jobs. This Liberal attack on another rural area will cause unnecessary pain to all the affected families. Why is the minister playing with people's lives and livelihoods?
The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, our government has stopped the decline of labour movement in the regions. We are continuing to offer good jobs for the middle class. Canadians are using online services more and more, and we understand that this means that the CRA has to modernize and to ensure that they can meet their needs. The government has committed to ensuring that Canadians from across the country have access to the best services when they deal with the CRA.
Manning.
That is, Mr. Speaker, that is not good enough. That is an attack on the middle class. The Liberal plan to devastate rural communities is getting worse. These are real jobs in jeopardy because the Liberals are taking Atlantic Canada for granted. Rural communities need jobs like this to survive. So when are the Liberals going to stop their attack on rural areas and allow people to continue to work in their home and communities?
The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, the announcement today confirms that the agency will hire more staff and ensure strong presence in rural areas from one ocean to another. We will continue to work with unions and with local stakeholders to accompany them in this transition. Canadians expect that the CRA will take good decisions and make good investments to deliver world-class services.
James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, Parliament ordered this government to stop fighting First Nation children in court and to comply with the Human Rights Tribunal. 2 days later, the government was back in court fighting against medical treatment for a First Nation child. And tomorrow, Cindy Blackstock will be back in court because of their stonewalling. When it comes to broken promises to First Nation people, government talk is really cheap, but their lawyers are expensive. We find out that since the ruling in January, this government spent over $500,000 fighting Cindy Blackstock with lawyers, even though she won. So simple question, how can they justify that?
Parliamentary Secretary for Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government welcomes the tribunal's ruling, and we've been taking concrete steps to address its order. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we've committed more than $635 million to address the child funding welfare gap in this country, and we've provided services to more than 900 kids since July, with an additional $382 million in investments under Jordan's principle, and explained and expanded the definition. It is, Mr. Speaker, this government prefers reconciliation with Indigenous people, and we know.
The honourable member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
And why are you fighting them in court? A humpback whale was found dead, entangled in an empty net near a salmon farm near Campbell River. This is the second time a whale has been entangled in this fish farm in 3 months. Last time, a juvenile humpback was trapped and needed to be rescued at this same site. Open-net salmon farms are clearly a risk to marine mammals. Will the government eliminate this problem by supporting my bill to transition this industry to safe close containment and protect marine mammals?
Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker, we obviously share our colleagues' concern with respect to the protection of marine mammals. The circumstances around this humpback whale's mishap are obviously of huge concern to the government. Mr. Speaker, that's why 2 weeks ago the Prime Minister, in a historic investment of $1.5 billion for ocean protections, put in place a series of measures that will not only ensure better protection of marine mammals, but also make the scientific and operational investments to ensure that this kind of horrible incident does not happen again.
Honourable member for Halifax.
Mr. Speaker, infrastructure investments we make today have the potential to lock in future greenhouse gas emissions, in many cases for years. That's why I brought my private member's motion M45 to this House, because we know we must reduce infrastructure-related GHGs now in order to combat climate change over the long term. Can the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities update this House on what the government is doing to reduce the GHG footprint of Canada's infrastructure today and in the future?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the member for Halifax for his strong advocacy on environmental sustainability. We are delivering on our historic commitment to grow the economy, increase productivity, mitigate and adapt to climate change, and build socially inclusive communities. Once in place, M45 would be part of our existing approval process for infrastructure projects. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Foothills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First Nations people across Canada, in fact, all Canadians deserve financial transparency from their communities. The lack of action from this government and the empty words from the Minister of Indigenous Affairs are completely unacceptable. The minister seems keen to making it almost impossible for First Nations people to have access to the financial audits for their community. Mr. Speaker, this minister is not enforcing the First Nations Financial Transparency Act. Why is she endorsing and allowing First Nations leadership to break the law?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. But I think it's quite obvious that on this side of the House, we don't believe in a process that's top-down. We believe in working with First Nations and all Indigenous people across the country. We see transparency, openness, and accountability, one of the hallmarks of doing that. But we're not going to implement something that the Conservatives tried to shove down the throats of Indigenous people. We are going to work with them to develop a transparency process that works for all Indigenous people.
The honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Mr. Speaker, the First Nations Transparency Act was put in place because grassroots First Nations, like the Blood Tribe, requested increased transparency from their elected leaders. some First Nations bands continue to file their Transparency Act disclosures despite refusal by the Liberals to enforce the law because they too recognize its benefit to their members. This minister is harming First Nations people by restricting easy access to financial information. Mr. Speaker, when will she begin to start enforcing the law?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government and First Nations government want more transparency. They want it increased and they want more accountability. But, Mr. Speaker, they do not want made-in-Ottawa solutions that are going to be forced upon them. What I say to the member opposite is that we are not prepared to enforce the top-down regulatory process that they had in place, but rather we will work with First Nations to ensure full transparency, full accountability for the work they do, and we will not penalize them in the meantime.
Member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, the epitome of top-down is the process that they've undertaken. We are talking about grassroots band members who are facing critical information, and the positive path forward is transparency as they look at how they move ahead. The reality, band members from Semiahmoo asked for financial information hundreds of times over 18 years. When the Transparency Act finally revealed that things were not as comfortable as they should have been, the Council didn't like it. So they have stopped filing, and now the information is no longer available. When will how will the Minister justify that this information is not available to the membership?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I have to be clear because the member knows that that is wrong. All First Nations governments and individuals have access to information. There is a process by which I have to go to do that. But, Mr. Speaker, what the minister decided last winter is that she would not use her discretionary power to unfairly punish the members of First Nations by withholding important program funding from them, something the Conservatives wanted to do, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, the Financial Transparency Act also provides insight into successful band management practices. And I think there's a great example that was reported in the province where the Osoyoos First Nations is one of the most business-minded in Canada. Virtually no unemployment. The chief's salary has been frozen for 2 years and is at a reasonable level. Thanks to the Transparency Act, other people can look at the financial statements, see how they're structured, and perhaps look at some of the best practice. Does the minister not realize that shared information is a benefit to one and all?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I have said before, there is a process whereby all members can access the information and transparency around their budget. After any allegation of misuse of public funds, we take that very seriously as a government. We have also conducted forensic audits when we felt that it was necessary to do so, and we ensure that the funds that are allocated are used for what they are intended. We'll continue to work with First Nations to implement a process that is fair and accountable and transparent that they are a part of, Mr. Speaker, not something dictated by the former government.
Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
The government promised gender parity for its senior appointments, and that means 50-50. But only a quarter of federal, Crown Corporation and agency directors are women. 1 in 4 is not gender parity. It's not even close. According to the Canadian Board Diversity Council, the government's approach is insufficient, and quotas may be necessary to bring about the desired change, they say. Will the government support my bill to ensure equal representation? Simple question, yes or no.
Honourable Minister for the Status of Women.
Mr. Speaker, we know that when women are involved in every aspect of our democratic society, that in fact Canada does better as a whole. And that's why we're so focused on ensuring that women have the same opportunities for economic success, for leadership, and to contribute to our country. So I look forward to continuing this work with all members of the House.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, the Heritage Minister may take the liberty of profoundly changing the rules governing our cultural distinctiveness, but she should at least come clean about her so-called public consultations. For the sake of transparency, will the Minister release the briefs submitted in connection with those consultations? Because one thing is sure to come up. Can our ecosystem count on her to step up and do the obvious, i.e. make foreign companies like Google, Facebook, and Netflix, pay their fair share? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his important question. I'd like to remind him that, of course, we are in an open and transparent process, and we will, of course, release all of the briefs from various stakeholders. I'd like to thank him. I know that he specifically made that request, and I, of course, agree with him. So there's a nice example of cooperation, Mr. Speaker.
For Lake Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government will be foolishly putting billions of taxpayer money at risk when they announce very soon that they'll be sole sourcing Super Hornet fighter jets. Respected Professor Eleanor Sloan said the government's plan to sole source Super Hornet fighter jets is wrong. The Super Hornet may or may not be the right aircraft for Canada, but we won't know that until there's a full competition for the contract. So why won't the Liberals hold an open, fair, and transparent competition that ensures we get the best value for the Canadian taxpayer, the best job for Canadians, and the best aircraft for the Royal Canadian Air Force?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I find it quite ironic considering the previous government was into sole sourcing the F-35, and they should have looked at this problem a long time ago. They should have replaced our aging fleet. But over the summer, we've done a considerable amount of work with my colleagues in the various departments. The officials have done a lot of work. We're getting all the necessary information, and we will make a decision on replacing the fighters, and we'll pick a process that's going to meet the needs of Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Selkirk and Lake Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, we need to do a reality check here. So while the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister claim that there's a CF-18 capability gap, the fact is the Liberals have a credibility gap on this issue. Just last week, when asked about the supposed capability gap in committee, the Chief of Defence Staff said, this is a false deduction. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's office has manipulated the Liberal cabinet to force a sole source contract. The only solution to fix this mess by the Prime Minister is to do the right thing. Will the Liberals hold a fair and open competition to get the best fighter jets for the brave men and women in uniform?
Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, there is a capability gap with our fighters, and there also a capability gap with our Navy. And if they had looked at and focused on the military, we would actually have joint supply ships right now and not having to look at fixing things in the interim. So we are focused on replacing our fighters. We will be making a decision on the process going forward because we are committed to replacing our fighters.
Member for Barrie. Order. Member for Barrie Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, the Veterans Affairs Committee has heard personal testimony from veterans about the impact of the anti-malaria drug mefloquine. Many of our veterans have testified about suffering long-lasting and life-altering side effects after using this drug. In fact, after hearing these stories, the Veterans Affairs Committee has unanimously agreed that action is needed. Mr. Speaker, why is the Defence Minister continuing to support the use of mefloquine, despite the mounting evidence of its harmful consequences?
Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, as I stated earlier, when our troops deploy into areas where there is malaria, we need to make sure that they are fully covered. We are looking at all aspects of these issues. The Chief of Defence Staff has asked the Surgeon General to look at this, and we will make sure that we make all the right decisions so that our troops are well looked after on operations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Glengarry Prescott Russell.
Mr. Speaker, supply-managed sectors are vitally important for the Canadian economy, contributing over $34 billion in overall economic benefit. La gestion de...
Under supply management, farmers and their families get a fair income, processors get stability, and consumers get high-quality products. Can the Minister of Agriculture tell us how the government is supporting our supply-managed industries?
Mr. President, and I thank my colleague from Glengarry Prescott Russell for his question and concern. Our government fully supports the supply management sector, and we will be meeting with the industry over potential changes to duty relief to improve the predictability of these imports, and we are looking at options on certification for spent fowl. We will continue to work with industry to ensure supply management is strong and competitive for many generations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Bow River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Southeastern Alberta and Saskatchewan ranch families are languishing from a single case of bovine tuberculosis. These families are in the dark and are extremely stressed about their financial situations. The herds have been quarantined by CFIA. They've been stopped from selling their calves. They've lost their one payday a year. Testing herds is taking months. Help is needed now. Will the Liberals implement an emergency relief program for the ranchers whose herds have been quarantined by CFIA?
Good question.
Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate my honourable colleague's question and concern. Our government is committed to protecting human and animal health and has launched a full disease investigation into this case. We understand the difficulties some ranchers may be facing as a result of bovine TB. That is why we are ensuring that CFIA does their job as quickly as possible in conducting their investigations. And we also need to ensure the industry is cleared of all this disease. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, during the election campaign, the Liberal Party promised to respect the federal public service. And yet, without any consultation whatsoever, nor any transparency, the government has decided to restructure the Shawinigan Tax Centre. Several workers, already saddled with the Phoenix pay system fiasco, now fear for their jobs. Mr. Speaker, can the minister reassure these workers by assuring them their jobs will be protected? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, my colleague opposite knows full well that the members involved were met with, and the member for Jonquière has congratulated us on our action.
Senator.
Mr. Speaker, residents of my riding of Scarborough Centre are working harder than ever, but many are worried that they won't have put away enough money for their retirement. Fewer Canadians have workplace pensions to rely on, and 1 in 4 families approaching retirement, 1.1 million families, are at risk of not saving enough. Could the minister please inform the House what the government is doing to help ensure Canadians can retire in dignity?
Honourable Minister of Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to our colleague for her advocacy on behalf of seniors. Our government is engaged to help hardworking Canadians achieve a safe and dignified retirement. Earlier this year, we reached, with 9 provinces, a historic agreement to make important improvements to the Canadian pension plan. Une fois pleinement implanté,
once fully implemented, this will increase Canadian pensions from 1/4 to 1/3 of their income, and will lower the rate of financial vulnerability from 24% to 18%.
Speaker, there are dozens of Alberta ranchers that have been ordered not to sell their cattle that are under CFIA quarantine. These ranchers do not have the facilities, the feed, or the financial resources to feed their cattle over the winter. They're being forced to pay thousands of dollars to feed cattle that normally would have been sold by now so that they could meet their bills. Will this Liberal government commit to an emergency relief program to help pay the feed costs for the herds that have been quarantined by the CFIA?
Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate my honourable colleague's question and concern. CFIA will bring in additional staff to make sure the testing is done as quickly as possible. CFIA will pay for compensation for any animals with bovine TB when they're destroyed. And we are discussing options for financial assistance for producers. You'll have to listen if you want. We are discussing options for financial assistance for producers whose animals are quarantined, but will not be destroyed because they test negative for bovine TB. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, according to the very federalist, very liberal Premier of Quebec, the so-called aid package for cheese producers will be paid out equally to all 10 provinces. Not only is $100 million over 4 years not enough, in fact, it's far too little, Quebec will get less than 25% when we produce 60% of the specialty cheeses. Will the minister boost the aid package to meet the needs of cheese producers? And will he solemnly commit to give Quebec producers their fair share, at least 60%.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable colleagues' question and concern. As my colleague is fully aware, we have sat down and consulted with the dairy industry and the processors, and the package that was put in place because of these discussions. We will be putting $250 million to make sure that the dairy sector is innovative and ready for CETA. We will be putting $100 million to make sure that our processing sector is ready, and I'm sure they will be ready. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, cheese producers say that this is obviously an insufficient aid package. Ottawa obviously doesn't care about Quebec's specialty cheeses. Big cheddar producers are as eligible for compensation as fine specialty cheese producers. Will the minister improve the aid package to help small cheese producers out, or is it just going to be more government bullshit? I call on the member to withdraw that remark. Or the member will not be heard from again for some period of time. The honourable member for Bécancour-Nicolas Sorel. Mr. Speaker, this government appears to be kowtowing to the big banks. C-29 will allow the banks to ignore Quebec's consumer protection and commercial practices legislation. It's a 45-year setback for Quebec consumers. The banks will be able to charge whatever they like with the government's consent. This from the same government that voted in favour of their using tax havens. I ask the 40 Quebec Liberal members, who do you work for the people or for the big banks? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the question is, it's self-evident, the answer. Perhaps he's the only member who doesn't understand that. What I can say is that we will continue to work on behalf of consumers in Canada. From the very outset, we've looked at all of our tax legislation and all of our legislation governing the banks, and we will always act in the interests of Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Louis Saint-Laurent on a point of order.
The minister talked about the job in Canada. So just to be sure that all Canadians have the right numbers, I would like to table this document, Labour Market Assessment 2016, produced by the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer in
the honourable member have the consent of the unanimous consent of the House to table the document. There does not appear to be unanimous consent.
The honourable member for Montcalm on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, point of order. Did you take into account the fact that the member for Mirabel did withdraw his remarks? No, because when I asked him to withdraw that remark, he shook his head. If he does wish to withdraw his remarks, I will give him the floor. I'll give him the opportunity to do so. The honourable member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, now that everyone knows what I think, I withdraw my remark.
Ce n'est pas l'affaire